by Chasing the Rainbows with your host, Bernice Quisenberry.
This week's episode is with Bree MB. Thank you so much for coming back.
Of course.
Bree.
Thanks for letting me be here.
Yes. And so this week's episode is called Survival Mode. We are going to be discussing over the next couple podcasts, is going to be going through the 4 stages of grief. So today we're talking about shock and numbness. The second phase is yearning and searching. Third is disorganization and despair. And fourth is reorganization and recovery. So the first stage here today, like I said, we're talking about shock and numbness.
Yeah.
So something I learned through this grief process years ago was these 4 stages of grief. And it's not something that I ever wanted to learn or ever envisioned myself learning.
Agreed.
And so shock, they say is a normal response during the immense sorrow, like when we're going through these devastating losses, and it makes complete sense.
Yeah. I definitely experienced that with all of my losses. And it's interesting, like the timing as far as how far, I think everyone's a little bit different as far as how long the stage lasts.
Right.
How long did it last for you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I want to say it was about 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
I think you and it's really hard to remember. And
I know.
mean, we're going to get into that part of this
Yeah.
phase about the memory and things like that. But I want to say it was several weeks.
Yeah. I think with my first stillborn, born Landon, I believe I was probably around 4 weeks, a month.
Yeah.
And then with Emma, I was probably more like 2.
Okay.
And I believe that's probably because I was more equipped. I knew, having gone through the loss of Landon, what I needed and
Right.
kind of what that stage of grief looks like and how I was going to react to it. So I think I was better equipped going into my loss with Emma. I learned a lot having gone through the loss of Landon. So I think that's why it was a little bit shorter, but everyone's different.
No, absolutely. And I think not that we once you go through the phase and you experience that and then you go through it again, it's almost because I didn't know. I had no idea what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
I just knew that I at first was worried that my body was just compartmentalizing. And I beat myself up because I'm like, why am I not sad about my baby?
Yeah.
Like, why am I not crying? Why am I not having these intense feelings like I'm feeling internally from like obsessing and processing and doing everything in my head about the loss? So
Yeah.
it was hard for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's so true because I did not cry
Yes.
during the stage very much. I mean, I did a little bit, but
Right.
mine started. So this stage of grief for me started at the ultrasound when we found out that my babies had died. And because I remember sitting there in the room there after they had scanned me and they told me, we don't see a heartbeat anymore. I remember sitting there and just staring at the floor and I couldn't speak. I physically couldn't speak because they were asking me, do you want us to call your husband? Do you want to call your husband? And I remember just slowly turning my head and looking at them and no words were coming out of my mouth. I was numb. I was in shock. I couldn't even process what they were just saying to me.
Absolutely.
It's I couldn't hear anything. It's almost like my whole world just was literally all I could do was stare at the floor. I couldn't hear or process anything.
Right. And I know I shared this when we got the news that we were going to be delivering Brooke early or, that we had these issues and things like that. I went through the same thing. And I think with us, with the different stages, right, of one going into a birth situation, which we were not expecting at 28 weeks, and then going into the NICU life and then losing ultimately Brooke. And it was each of those different I felt like almost we were going through it.
Yeah.
And I remember that too. I remember being told that there was no fluid anywhere and I was going to have to be on bed rest in the hospital and that she would have to be more than likely delivered early. And they didn't know what was going on. And I remember the doctor repeating himself, I want to say 6 or 7 times, and I still could not hear her.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, what? What is going on? Where am I going?
Yeah.
And I just remember my eyes almost getting fuzzy.
Yeah.
My vision was blurry. And I just thank goodness, Steve was present, my husband, and he was there and he could then tell me everything. But I just remember being escorted through the hospital to go be put on bed rest. And I don't remember really anything.
Yeah. You blank out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it just, And honestly, for me, I felt like the shock and numbness phase was, in my opinion, one of the worst.
Absolutely.
Just because I didn't know what was happening and why my body was.
Well, it's
going
like you have
through
no
this.
control.
Yes.
Like you have no control over your mind, your
Yes.
physical body. Like how I
Yes.
couldn't speak, I couldn't think to process the words to say, call my husband.
And
like
obviously, we can talk.
Yeah,
Look
right.
at us on a podcast,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But
we have no problem talking.
Yes, right.
But it's so true. Like it's everything shuts down.
Yes.
And to me, that is challenging because I like to have control of things. I'm one of those,
yes,
and I
yes.
had no control over what was happening.
Yes.
I had no control over what they just said to me. I had no control over my physical body. I had no control in my mind to process words, to speak the words. Like there was no control, and there was a lot of I felt like I was spiraling out of control because I had no control over anything.
Right. And they say about that, in this phase is that powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that too, because you don't have any control over anything because
No.
your body is just completely taking over. And they almost say, like with this phase, that it's the amnesia, that it like helps your body to protect itself.
Yeah, that makes
because
sense.
of going through this. And as we process the reality of what just happened.
Well, and there really is amnesia with that because if
Yeah.
looking back on those two stillbirths in particular,
Yeah.
I don't remember hardly anything about that. I remember little bits and pieces of things that stood out.
Right.
But as far as that month or two weeks to a month of processing and being in this stage, I don't remember much.
No. And my attention span was so short, and I could not focus on anything.
Yes.
So my concentration was completely out the window.
Yep.
And I swear people were talking to me, and I would ask them to repeat themselves a bunch of times. And this is outside of even that example I gave before, but after we lost Brooke. And I was like, what? Like, what are you asking me? And what? And I think that's also why us survivors don't know what to ask for.
Yeah.
When someone, because, family, friends, circles, all of our close community wants to know how can we help. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I
Like,
can't even think for myself right now,
Right.
let alone get a reasonable solution
Exactly.
to help me
Exactly.
through this because you can't think clearly.
And you're so right. It was like I don't remember those weeks
Yeah.
after at all. We had Brooke's service in there, and I do remember I remember different things, and I know that as time goes on too, this phase does go, you
Yeah.
know, and then your body also, you'll take you to the next phase when it's ready. What's interesting is, and we don't have that control, and that's what, that whole,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think also too, I kept questioning, is something wrong with me? And why am I not grieving my baby? Why am I not
Oh, yeah.
crying? And why am I not feeling these emotions? And then I was beating myself up even more because I'm like, in my head, this is the only thing I can focus on, right? Like, that's the only thing that's in my mind is just like reliving the events of what
Yeah.
just occurred. Because one, I can't even believe it just happened. I was in that denial, like the whole, like, did this, like, is this my reality now? So I was like, had a false sense of reality and all of that, but like, it was really hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was kind of in the same boat, and I couldn't. I don't know. Like I just couldn't process
Yes.
anything.
Yes, process. That is perfect. I say about processing, but it really wasn't processing. It was just like obsessing.
Yes,
with it.
yes. Well, because that's really you're in this zone. I don't know, call it a
Yeah,
zone
yeah.
almost
I mean,
like this
really.
Twilight zone.
Robotic zone.
That's exactly. You're
Yeah.
like a robotic, and you're going through motions, and you're not able to like be present.
No.
Because you're just going through the motions of everything.
Absolutely. Emotionally, mentally, like not present at all. Physically, like I was like, it's like an outer body experience, like that robotic feeling, like I'm just going through all of life, just this numb, just being.
Yep.
Honestly.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think too, like we said about the denial and all that, like the confusion and our failure to accept reality. Like I question, like, why did this happen to us? How did this happen to us? Why me? Like, why my baby? Like, what did or how did or whatever, you know, why? Just why?
Yeah, why? I think questioning why was a big thing, and I'm sure it is for a lot of survivors. Is questioning like, why did this happen? Because, but I remember feeling there was moments where I'd be like, I'm still pregnant. Like this isn't actually. I remember having phantom kicks.
Phantom kicks.
Yes.
I was just gonna say that.
Yes,
Right.
and it was the strangest thing. And I remember I remember thinking, this isn't real. But then another part of me wanted so desperately to believe that they were still alive inside of me that it was hard to determine like what was reality and what wasn't, because I was so wanting so badly to be with them again that it's almost like I was manifesting things to happen, like physically, like these phantom kicks and stuff like that.
Well, and I think, looking at it, that is ourselves almost like in this shock and phase, right? Because I didn't know what just happened, that whole whirlwind. I know we always refer to it as a whirlwind, but it does remind me of the shock and numbness part of it. It happens quick. Right. And just going through all those events and the hurricane of it all, like we can't at least for me, I could not make sense of anything.
Yeah. And a lot of it, it is a whirlwind. So once you get that news, it's like boom, 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 boom. All these things happen. Like they take you to the hospital. They, if you have to deliver or whatever happens, or if you need a DNC or whatever it is that you need to get done. So it's like you're busy doing all these things that you need to do. And I feel like I had a lot of shock and numbness initially, but I sort of, because there was so many things to do physically, it's almost like I didn't really go into a deep stage of shock and numbness until I got home. Yeah. When all that people catering to you and coming to you at the hospital and, taking care of you, all that suddenly goes away. Yes. And now you're sitting here in your bedroom, like, what just happened? Yes. And then you're trying to process that too. Absolutely. And it's so hard.
It is so hard. And like we said at the beginning, everyone's different. Like this could happen for hours for someone, this could happen days, this could happen weeks, but everybody is different. And I remember, sitting there and just having blank stares.
Yes.
And it feeling comfortable. Like that to me was comfort at that point, was just having those blank stares and just sitting in bed doing that.
Yeah.
And it was like, because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
Because of, everything.
I slept a lot. Because I could escape from this horrible reality.
Right.
And I remember just wanting to sleep. I would just lay in bed, and I'm sure I had some sort of depression, because I had no motivation to do anything at this point. And I was so numb that I didn't care. Like I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted my baby back.
Right.
And I wanted to, I didn't care if I had to sleep all day just to escape my reality.
Exactly. And I think too, like I loved, during that time, sleeping and things like that. Like you said, it was that escape, but then also at certain points I would be restless where I had to get up and do things because I couldn't sit with it. And because I don't know, like my body, like I just couldn't control it. And that's, I think, the hardest thing.
Well, and that goes back to
admitting this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that goes back to the whole lack of control and how, that's why I really struggled with this phase, is because I didn't have that control or desire to do anything.
Well, and we just went through traumatic losses, traumatic events, all of that stuff. And when I say that, like, being told you're going on bed rest, then all of a sudden 2 or 3 days later, we're delivering, our baby girl, and then she's in the NICU. And then, the worst case scenario, we had that happen. And then it's like, just to try to get your bearings.
Yeah.
Like it was just that whole experience, and it's not just even those weeks. It's like happening within days. It's happening within one day, and all of that whirlwind is just all around us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, with those out of control feelings comes, and we had a whole episode on this, is that fear and panic.
Yeah,
and those panic attacks. Oh my goodness, during that time, because we just had worst case scenario play out.
Yep.
So when's the other shoe going to drop for the rest of my life? Yep. Right. Is what you like, at least I thought that, like this already happened to us. Like I know something else bad's going to happen because that's where my mind is.
I definitely struggle with panic too. So I recall for months, actually, not even just during this stage, but for months, I would be in a dead sleep. And I would wake up and it's like my body forgot to breathe and I physically wasn't breathing. And it was this panic, and I would race out of the bedroom, like in that fight or flight mode where like I was flighting, like I was gone.
Yes.
And I just remember, like, I would get to about out my bedroom door to the top of the steps, and all of a sudden I'm like, I remembered I could breathe. Like, and I later found out they were panic attacks, but it was in the middle of sleeping, which I didn't know was a thing, but it is a thing. Right. And I would have these horrible episodes, and it was always the same thing where I wouldn't breathe.
Yeah.
And I'd wake up and I would start racing. I don't know what I was doing, like why I was running away.
Why?
But it's almost like the
it
whole,
made
like when
sense.
you're choking, like
Yes.
you get away from people for some reason.
Right.
But that's what I would do. I would race out the bedroom door to the top steps, and then all of a sudden I remembered I could breathe. And then, but it was horrible, and it lasted for months.
Yeah.
And as I was going through, and it started in this stage.
And I think what's interesting is too, like that physical aspect, right? We don't
Yeah.
talk about enough. Like I had a lot of digestive issues after we lost Brooke, and it was from that constant stage of just like worrying, being out of control, fears, all of that, and like it was like I couldn't keep anything, you know, and it would just. You know,
absolutely.
and I was on the toilet all the time. But also, you know, something that was really weird that happened to me that I never experienced before in my life. My husband and I were out in public, and it was around the 2-week mark after we lost Brooke. And all of a sudden I started getting these shivers, and I started getting really cold. And then all of a sudden, like I couldn't stop shaking.
Wow.
To the point that I had to go home, like get under covers.
Yeah.
And then like my husband laid with me and like helped me to like get it down. And I mean, I know now that that's also a trauma response. I don't know if it's anything part of this phase or not with grief,
Yeah.
but I think it's just important to note because these physical things are happening as
Yeah.
our body is trying, our minds are trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that as you're going through this, because you did experience something traumatic,
Yeah.
that it can manifest physically.
Right.
And you know, my panic attacks, your
Right.
digestive issues, and your that
Yes.
episode of shivering and stuff.
Yes.
It gets amazing how your body responds to things like that in stressful events.
I know it is. And it was shocking because like I said, it almost scared me. Like what is
Yeah.
wrong? And I felt
Oh,
like I
yeah.
was having, it almost felt like a cold too. Like all of a sudden, like, am I getting COVID or like,
Yeah,
am I
right.
experiencing these things? Because like it did, it felt like the like fever, the shakes,
Yeah.
like all of that stuff. And then my joints were achy.
Wow.
And my body was just having like a full blown on reactive.
Like inflammation attack
Yes.
to when I think those physical manifestations are a reason why it's, you know, you're not only are you in this fog and you're physically going through all this stuff, but like you can't make decisions, right? So like
Right.
you're supposed to just jump back into work and
Oh, my
make
goodness.
decisions. And I feel like, gosh, it just irritates me because I remember having to go back and function. Now, thankfully, I worked for a place who's super understanding. And
Right.
like, you know, I wasn't this high level employee at this point in my life because I was, you know, I was struggling to even make basic decisions. So they were very understanding. But the fact that I had to go back right away to work and not, you know, you have a baby, you get up to 12 weeks off, at least here
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania. But, you know, I feel like if you lose a baby, you should get the same time because
Absolutely.
you still are going through the same physical changes. But now you're adding grief into the process. So, you know, you have insomnia, you can't make decisions, you're having these physical manifestations of things, and like you're supposed to be right back to work as soon as you're cleared. And to me, it's not long enough.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, we technically by, you know, law, I don't know if it's, you know, state or federal, but
Yeah.
here in Pennsylvania, 3 days you get to grieve and then you have to return to work. So what's interesting is with that, you know, once I was medically cleared to return to work, since my baby died, I was told you need to return to work. And it was like, what? Like it was right after we lost her because, you know, we only got that standard because I was cleared right before she died. And I was like, oh my goodness, this cannot be real life right now because you don't know up from down. You don't know.
No.
And we had to because one, we weren't expecting to bury our baby.
Yeah.
So we had all of those bills. We had all the
man.
medical bills from the NICU, all of the ones from me in the hospital, all of those things that we had to handle. So I had to return to work.
Yeah.
There was no other option.
Yeah.
And so we had to follow whatever we were being told.
I feel like my blood pressure just went up 20 points talking about this because I
goodness,
get
right?
so, like, I'm just so passionate about this because I feel like it really is. You just went
Yes.
through this trauma and you can't think clearly.
Right.
You have burial arrangements to make.
Yes.
Like I already touched on it. It's so frustrating because you need more time.
Absolutely.
You just do.
I know. And, it's interesting looking at other countries, overseas and things like that, that give off a lot longer time, 6 months for maternity leave and then giving to if the baby passes even longer time and things like that. And you look at that and you're like, wow, how generous.
Yes.
And then here we are over here. We
3
get a
days
few
later
days.
and back to it.
I'm sorry. I don't like my nervous laughter is because I cannot believe this is our reality.
Yeah.
It's not because I think this is funny by any stretch of the imagination,
right.
because I don't. I was so disgusted during that time to realize that this is what really
like,
happens.
Is this real life? Is this really how it is?
And I felt like then I was being treated like a workhorse because, I mean, that's what you go to as being, in this stage and like, because I already had all of this other stuff I was dealing with. How can I then listen to other people or even process anything at work or do anything with it when I have all this other stuff going on?
Yeah, no, I'm
and it's out of our control, which
Absolutely.
is even, I can't control my grief process. I can't control my timeline. I can't do any of that. We don't know when it's going to hit.
Yep.
And
the stage lasts so different. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I feel like this stage is critical.
Yes.
Especially with returning to work.
Yes.
Like, this stage is so critical because you are so numb and you can't think clearly and you can't,
you're just so foggy. Like, I call it foggy brain because like I didn't know what else.
I just feel like this stage is in particular, like, you got to work through this stage and let's talk about working through this stage. Like, what do you do to work through this stage? Because to me, honestly, I just had to let it happen.
Yep.
I just had to ride the wave.
Right.
And I had to cling to the things and the people that would help me through this stage. But I feel like there's no magical solution to getting through this stage other than lean on your support system. And I was thankful to have people who just came and did things for me.
That is really
because
important.
You can't delegate in this stage.
Because you don't know. You don't know what to ask for. Well, you can't focus or concentrate. You just don't have any sort of sense of anything besides just going through this right now.
Yep. I think just surrounding yourself with people who can understand what you're going through is important. But other than that, this is just part of the grief that you have to ride the wave and let your body do what it needs to do to process and get to that stage of being able to, get back to being able to make decisions again and function, because this stage is temporary. We'll get to that next stage of grief. And you just gotta let yourself go through it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Well, and I think it's important to say too, right? Having a support system, but also, something that was big for me, and I know we talk about this in every episode, but is having other survivors who understand and have gone through this too alongside of you.
Yeah.
So you aren't feeling isolated and alone
or crazy.
Even more. Yeah.
Because
you do feel crazy.
You do feel crazy.
I did. I felt.
Me too.
And it was me actually understanding, like, why am I not crying? Why am I not feeling my feelings? And I was so worried that like I went back to with the compartmentalizing, like, am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then like that guilt of like, I don't care enough, or there's, all of these things that are circling around, and it's a whirlwind. Like
and you can get in your head about it, and you can, you don't want to sit there because I feel like I tend to overthink everything. And like,
100%.
You feel guilty and you're like, why am I not crying? Why am I not doing this? Why am I having these panic attacks in the middle of the night? Like, is that normal? Am I not breathing? Like, all these that you feel crazy.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with survivors who are like, yes, I did that too. Yes, that happened to me.
Or they could see why.
Yes. And say, hey, it's going to be okay. Like, this won't last. This part of won't last forever. You will be okay.
Yeah.
I just, having that hope to me was really important, that someone spoke that to me.
Yes.
And I had several people who were able to speak hope to me, because otherwise you can just spiral, and you need somebody to tell you you're going to be okay.
I almost felt like it was like during this period, and then returning to different places and hearing what people wanted to say to, us returning, like, everything happens for a reason, or, this is in a plan, and things like that. And during this phase, I think it was almost, it did protect me.
Yeah.
One, because, I couldn't, then say to somebody something back, and I just kind of accepted what anyone was saying to me. But it didn't give me a chance then to educate others on the insensitivities of those kind of comments. But I also don't think I was in a right frame of mind either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously during it. But but yeah, I think, this phase I find to be the worst for me.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you. It was very challenging for me. And, I just struggled a lot. I struggled physically, I struggled mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all the things.
Right. How we question it, right?
Yep.
Because
why did this happen to me? How did this happen?
Yes.
Did this really happen?
Did this really happen? The reality of it, that was really hard to set in because, like you said, and when we went back to, I still couldn't believe we even delivered her, let alone she's no longer, alive.
Yeah.
And things like that. And the acceptance piece was really hard.
Yeah, I agree.
Really hard. So, and so any other survivors out there that are going through this phase right now, just know you are not alone.
Nope.
We understand. Even if we have not gone through something that you are going through in this phase, we have others that understand and are behind you 100% and alongside you during this journey. So we don't want you to be out there on an isolated island alone.
And I think it's important to say that this stage happens no matter what stage of pregnancy you were at, or if your baby was born for several weeks, or like Brooke was, or whatever stage. I feel like the stages of grief can happen to anyone at any time. Absolutely. Through any situation.
Any loss,
and a loss is a loss. I say it all the time, like, people would say to me, well, I was only this far along and you were this far along. I'm like, it's a loss. It's your baby. It's the hopes and the dreams. And, so, and
it goes back to fertility loss, for example, right? Like, and we have an episode on that with the infertility is fertility loss.
Yep.
And grieving that loss, right? And going through all of these phases, being told that you're not going to naturally conceive a baby.
Yes.
Or, there's these things happening. And it's just processing everything, and it's around all of that, like fertility, pregnancy, and baby loss.
Yep.
Like, that's why
it's all you can experience this stage through all of that.
Yep. Absolutely, 100%. So, thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in, and we will be on next week.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.